Hello, my name's Josh Franks, and I'm one of the Harvestfield leaders for the Tennessee Baptist Mission Board. And I just want to take a couple minutes and share a little bit of my story with you. There's been a couple times in my life where I have experienced a unique outpouring of God's power as He moves to answer the prayers of His people. One of those seasons came as I accepted the call to pastor my second church. I was the pastor of a First Baptist church in rural West Tennessee. The population of the town was about 1,500. And before I got there, the church had a pretty tumultuous decade. At the beginning of the decade, the church had went through a split, and it was an ugly split. In fact, it was so ugly that the deacons kind of got in a fist fight on the floor at a Wednesday night business meeting. And so the church split, and then they had a season, without a pastor, and maybe a pastor that wasn't culturally a great fit, and then another season without a pastor. And it had gotten so bad that almost everybody under age of 60 had left the church. And the senior saints that were left had actually had hard conversations about whether or not they should still be a church. Ultimately, they decided that God still had plans for them, and God called me there, and I went in, and I didn't have some big grand plan or some big strategic vision. I just wanted to love the people where they were, and I was going to call the people to pray. I talked to the interim pastor prior to my arrival, and he said, these are the greatest people in the world. They'll love you like nobody else. He said, my only fear is they're not a people of prayer. And so I went in with this on my mind, and I began to preach on prayer. And then we had a small group on prayer where I taught how to pray. And then we designed a prayer service on Sunday night. And the prayer service wasn't your typical Baptist prayer service where you sit around and talk about who has cancer or who has bunions for 45 minutes, and then one person prays and you all go home. Now, it was a service where the people actually prayed. They prayed for one another. They prayed over one another. They prayed for different issues in the community. They prayed for salvation of the lost by the name. We just all came together, and we all prayed together in agreement because we wanted God's best. And as we began to pray, we began to sense God move in a special way. And so we began to schedule cottage prayer meetings in people's homes, and we would all come together and we prayed. And in the first 6 months, there was this remarkable time. We saw 100-year high water mark for baptisms in the history of the church. We doubled in size in the first 6 months and continued to grow through there. And we doubled in size almost exclusively through evangelistic church growth. People were coming to saving faith in remarkable numbers. And it's all because people prayed. It's certainly not because I had any plan or big vision beyond calling the people to seek the Lord. And so it's this remarkable, explosive time. And I think it's best understood through the lens of three stories. The first is a young lady. Her name was Brittany. And Brittany, she had no connection to the church, didn't grow up in church, had never been in church. She was married. Husband didn't grow up in church. They lived a little bit of a rough lifestyle. They liked to drink and they liked to party. They had 3 teenage kids. But they were having a really difficult time in their marriage. And she was talking to one of her friends in town about it. And the friend said, you need to go talk to the preacher. When you're the First Baptist Church pastor in a small rural town, then you are the town pastor. And so I'll never forget it. I was sitting at my desk on one Tuesday morning, and I look up, and there's this girl standing in my doorway, and she's got tears streaming down her face. And I said, honey, what's wrong? And she said, I'm lost, and I need to be saved. Like that's low-hanging fruit. That's fruit that nobody labored for. And so she sat down, and I counseled with her, and I shared the gospel with her, and she prayed to receive Christ. After we began to talk about her marriage, and I said, if you'll go home and you'll be the faithful wife that God's called you to be, then He'll bless your home. Over the next month, I saw her husband and her 3 teenage children come to saving faith, and I had the privilege of baptizing the entire family together. And it's all because somebody prayed. Second story is about a man named Dan. Dan was 49 years old, and Dan was one of the deacons that got in the fight in the business meeting. He was actually the leader of the faction that left the church. And when I first got there, we had some conversations. Dan had talked to me about maybe I want to come back. And I said, you're always welcome to come back, but we've got to come back the right way. And he blowed up in my office one day, and he's like, I'm not apologizing to nobody for nothing. I didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not going to apologize. And I said, well, Dan, that's fine. But there's healing that's got to occur if you want to come back. And we're always ready to have that conversation when you are. Well, one Sunday morning I preached, and I look up, and here came Dan down the aisle during the invitation time. And I really didn't know what was going on. And I sort of was like, I'm going to have to throw hands in front of the church here. I'm not sure. My security team sort of bucked up. Everybody was kind of waited with bated breath about what was going to happen. But Dan come forward and he just throwed his arms around me and he began to weep. And he said, Brother Josh, there's sin in my life and I need to repent from that. So reluctantly, I gave Dan a microphone, and Dan publicly repented of his sin during this season that the church split. And it was the most remarkable thing to see the older men and to see the deacons who were here during that time to come forward, and they all put their arms around Dan and they all wept together and they all knelt together and they all prayed together. After the service, I was talking with Dan and his wife, and we began to counsel with them, and they realized that they had never been saved to start with. And so both of them prayed to receive Christ, and I baptized both of them. And I kid you not, this deacon who got in a fight during a business meeting and led a church split wound up the best church member I've ever had. And it's all because somebody prayed. Third story is a young man named Tony. Tony's about my age. He was 39 at the time. And Tony had a rough upbringing. His father was abusive. His father left the family. When he was in high school, he dropped out. Got into drugs, got into selling drugs, got into trouble with the law, wound up in prison for a stint. And I really connected with Tony after he was released from prison. He had a couple boys that were the age of my boys, and I coached them on the baseball team. And I just wanted to minister to Tony, just wanted to try to love Tony where he was. And he was never really open to having a gospel conversation, but I brought his name to my prayer warriors, and we began to pray for Tony. Well, one night I got a phone call and he said, "Preacher, I need to come to your house." And I said, "Tony, you're always welcome at my house, buddy. You ain't even got a call." And so Tony came over and he said, "You're the first Christian that's ever treated me like a human being, and I want to know the Jesus you know." And Tony prayed to receive Christ, and I baptized Tony. But the most remarkable part of Tony's story was over the next 6 months, we had multiple, and I mean multiple people called the church office wanting to know what happened to Tony. One of the school teachers called to talk to me, and she said, "Brother Josh, I have known Tony for 39 years, and I have known his children for the last 12 years, and I don't know what's happened, but he's different, and I want to know what you did." And I said, "I didn't do anything. Somebody prayed, and God saved Tony's life. God saved Tony's soul, and God changed Tony's heart." Friend, that is the power of prayer. When God's people are faithful to pray, you see marriages healed, you see families saved, you see relationships restored, and you see lives changed. And so no matter what you do, stay prayerful. Everything we do either begins in prayer or ends without it. Seek the Lord, and you will find him.